Hello again, Buckeye fans. It's time for the Silver Bullets podcast. I am Michael Citro.
And I'm Chip Minnich.
And Chip, we saw another instant classic on Saturday. Ohio State remains undefeated 5-0 after a wild double comeback victory over Penn State in Happy Valley. And as we dissect this game this week, we have to talk about the many things we got right and the many things we got wrong last week when we were talking about this game and looking ahead to it.
Michael, I believe you are understating it just slightly when you call that game wild in terms of the roller coaster of emotions that I think, speaking for myself, I think just about every Ohio State fan, regardless of whether they made the trek eastward into Pennsylvania or if they were watching it at home like you and I were. I mean, it was looking pretty grim and dire midway through the fourth quarter, and then all of a sudden Ohio State dug deep and found enough within themselves to pull out a much needed victory, and leaving Penn State just wondering what do they have to do to finish off Ohio State, because that makes 2 years in a row that Ohio State came from behind to eke out a 1-point victory.
Well, the first thing you have to do is never bring field goals to a touchdown fight.
Yeah, I'm sure that helps, but I'm sure we'll get into that as we start analyzing and dissecting, as you said, what went well and what did not.
Yeah, Syracuse learned that too against Clemson. Never bring field goals to a touchdown fight. It just doesn't work.
Oh, gosh, absolutely.
So I'm going to start with a little bit different this week. I'm going to start with the things we got wrong and the things we got right. And I think it's fair to say that we both thought this was going to be a high-scoring shootout type game. We got that wrong.
Yeah, I think by and large, and I'm not implicating, I mean, I'll speak for myself, and I know that I think you would agree. We both last week, we were predicting high scoring, but it's fair to say that, our esteemed colleagues at the ozone.net, I mean, it was pretty much, I think, a consensus across the board. Everyone was expecting high scoring. If I may be mistaken, but I think when we did the staff picks, that the article that comes out every Friday morning for the ozone.net, I don't think there was one staff member who predicted against Ohio State, but by the same token, I don't think there was one staff member who predicted that Penn State would score less than at least 30 or 31 points.
Yeah, I think for sure the winning score was above 30 in every case, and it was above 40 in many cases.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we really thought Ohio State's defense was going to be, I don't want to say, like the weak link, but the weaker of the sides of the ball going into this game. And not that Ohio State's defense is without fault or criticism for various aspects within this game, but I completely agree with Coach Meyer when he said that the defense was what was keeping Ohio State in the game, especially through the first half.
Absolutely. If you had told me before the game that Ohio State would concede 26 points to Penn State, I would have expected a comfortable win.
Let me ask you a kind of a playing devil's advocate question here. If we had said prior to the game that not only in terms of Penn State would score that many points, but Trace McSorley would account for nearly 500 yards of total offense by himself, would you still have thought that Ohio State would come out the winner?
Oh, absolutely not. If you would have told me that Trace McSorley was, even that he was going to run for 175 yards, I'm like, well, that game is not going to go well at all. And I wouldn't have expected, with the total yardage he put together, I would not have expected Ohio State to be within 2 touchdowns, just based on the yardage alone. If you had, come back in time and said, yeah, this is what McSorley's going to do on Saturday night, I would have been like, I don't even know if I want to watch this game,
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean this with no disrespect to Dwayne Haskins, because he was, one of the offensive player of the week in the Big Ten. In my humble estimation, Trace McSorley definitely should have been the player of the week for that performance he put on against Ohio State on Saturday night.
Yeah, I was gonna talk about that a little later in the show, but I absolutely agree with you. I don't see how Obviously, Haskins gets the W. He had the game-winning drive, and really was terrific in the second half, especially in the later half of the fourth quarter. He was amazing, and very poised. Had put up with a lot all night. Had dealt with a lot of adversity and came through it. And all of that is good. But at worst, he should be, I should say, at best for him, he should be co-Big Ten Offensive Player of the Week, because McSorley single-handedly took Penn State to the brink of a victory in that game.
Yeah, I mean, he did everything within his power up to the very last play, which, I mean, as you said, we're going to get to it, but the very last offensive play that Penn State had, that you can't blame Trace McSorley for that. That's for certain.
Absolutely. So let's continue on with the things we got right, things we got wrong. I think we both felt that Miles Sanders was going to break a few, explosion plays in the run game. We were wrong about that.
Yeah, from the onset, watching it, I have to confess, I was with my wife and some friends at a family friend's home watching the game, and I'd like to give myself a pat on the back because my behavior was a little bit more restrained than it usually is within the Minnich household. I don't feel quite liberated enough to start screaming at the television, especially when it's not my home. But digressing from that, it seemed from the onset that Ohio State, their defensive philosophy was going to force Penn State, at least at the onset, if they were going to win this game, that they were going to do it through the air, because, as you said, Sanders was not really much of a factor throughout most of the game.
Yeah, 16 carries for 43 yards, much like last year against Saquon Barkley, who had the long kick return and also had one explosion run. Really, they bottled Barkley up last year. They bottled up Sanders this year. And this is not a defense that has, to this point, stopped running backs, explosive running backs from, having a few of those plays per game. But, there was no running room for Sanders. Not only credit the Ohio State defensive line, which played very well throughout the game, but I think this was really the best game so far this year for the starting linebacking crew. I mean, they weren't perfect by any means, but they certainly did raise their level in this game.
Right. I think you are being very fair and even-handed in your assessment, because, yes, there were mistakes made. Yes, there were times where it seemed puzzling in terms of what they were doing when we were talking earlier about Trace McSorley. When sometimes where it seemed like he had no linebacker spying on him, and that's where he gained a significant chunk of those yards on the ground. But by the same token, the linebackers, when they did spy on McSorley, when they did, bottle up Sanders, I would completely agree with you. I think this was probably the best game that the starting linebackers had so far this 2018 season.
One of the things we got right, we were both a little worried about the slant pass, and one of them went 93 yards in this game.
Oh yeah, and we talked about it last week, and KJ Hamler, I don't care. Like, I remembered saying freshman, I remember you saying sophomore. I think you would agree with me. It doesn't matter what year that guy is. We'll just say that we agree that he's fast.
Yeah.
And in the open field, he was gone. And if anything, our worst fears were realized on that slant when it seemed, okay, Ohio State has them pinned back deep, and the next thing you know, Hamler was off to the races, as you said, for 93 yards. It was one of those big plays that Ohio State, we were afraid that they were going to give up, and they certainly did to KJ Hamler.
Yeah, and he had another one for about 36 yards, I want to say, that was the play that looked like a busted coverage. He got behind Jordan Fuller, but I'm not sure Fuller was the man supposed to be on him in that play, and that was the play that Pryor got thrown out of the game for targeting that was, well, I mean, targeting is a word that triggers me anyway, but I don't think it was any kind of targeting on that play whatsoever.
Yeah, I as soon as that happened, and I mean this with no disrespect to KJ Hamler, because you don't want to see anyone get hurt. I don't care. Mm-hmm. And I mean, so I only hope that he is doing well, because I haven't seen anything online in terms of how he is doing. But as soon as that play took took place, and they showed from the replay that it was more of Pryor's shoulder pad hitting Hamler's helmet, it wasn't helmet to helmet.
Mm-hmm.
I immediately said, to the people I was watching the game with, I said, when they said, well, how is that targeting? And I said, you got me, because nobody really can give a clear definition as to when it is or when it isn't. I know that Penn State, they suffered a targeting penalty, and when they showed that to me looked like a clear-cut definition. It was helmet to helmet, and I'm not just saying that as an Ohio State fan. It looked like the backup defensive lineman, and his name is escaping me at the moment, when he was ejected from the game, that looked to me like legitimate targeting. What happened to Isaiah Pryor? It did not, but like you said, I mean, it's puzzling, and I don't mean to trigger you, because like you said, it is one of those things, but I agree with somebody who on Across the Field, their post game podcast / Facebook Live, however Gerd and Tom want to refer to it. I'm definitely warming up to the idea of more of like the soccer approach of like the yellow card, red card variety of kind of how they could assess that penalty better. Maybe that I'm not sure if that would ever be something that the rules committee would ever acknowledge, but I think there has to be some kind of an adjustment, because it just seems as though, I'm sure you have seen it. There was a game, not this weekend, but I think previous weekend, where with USC, there was it looked to me like that was targeting, and it wasn't called. So it just seems like there are just how it's called and when it's called. It just seems like it fluctuates up and down the spectrum in terms of nobody knows what the clear definition of targeting is anymore.
Right. It's one of those fouls that, I mean, you look at the Penn State guy, his name's escaping me too, Antonio something.
Shelton.
Yes,
That's it. Antonio, thank you. You gave me the first, I gave you the last.
Yeah, so he goes in, and that looked like the textbook definition. He left his feet, hit KJ Hill out of bounds, which doesn't come into play in targeting, but he was out of bounds. He leaves his feet. His helmet hits KJ Hill's helmet. Looked like the crown area of the helmet to me. And that looks like the definition of the foul. And that's one that if it's whether it's your guy or whether it's the other guy, you go, yeah, I can't argue with that. That's not something that should be done. Where the Pryor hit comes in is that the receiver is stumbling. Pryor comes over thinking, I'm the last guy. If I don't make the tackle, he's scoring a touchdown. I got to come over and make a tackle. Now, by the time he sees that the receiver's stumbling, collision is already set in stone. It's already going to happen. So all he could do is try to pull up, which he clearly did. And as the receiver goes down, his helmet hits Pryor's shoulder pad. That's clearly not anything Pryor could have done on that play. So it's one of those things. I agree with you on the yellow card, red card situation. I don't think that that's a targeting penalty that should. That's one of those things where you don't flag it. You just give the guy a warning.
Right. At worst, I mean, let's just make it. You get a warning and a 15-yard penalty.
Yeah, but instead he's out of the game, and
right,
it really puts a thin secondary like Ohio State's. That really puts them at a disadvantage for the game. And then of course also you had Damon Arnett get hurt, had his bell rung. So two starters out of the defensive backfield, and when your whole defense for the game is predicated on make him throw the football. That's not ideal.
Considering the fact that Isaiah Pryor, as a result of his targeting penalty, will be withheld until the second half of this coming week against Indiana, let's just hope that the secondary coaches are going to include Shaun Wade more in the safety rotation. As you said, it's kind of a thinning secondary now. Shaun Wade can't possibly be any worse back there in with regards to coverage at safety than what we have seen so far this season.
Right, exactly. Getting back to our rights and wrongs, we were concerned about the size of Juwan Johnson, and we were right to be a little concerned about that, as he made an unbelievable one-handed grab over Damon Arnett early in the game to get Penn State kind of started and get their juices flowing a bit. And I had some folks, or at least one person on social media, who said, Arnett's got to locate the football, and I'm like, come on. It doesn't matter if he knows where the football is exactly to the millimeter. He's not winning that battle.
Right. I mean, Juwan Johnson, channeled his inner Beckham and went up one-handed and I mean that was just a terrific catch.
Mm-hmm.
But give credit to Johnson for all-out effort, and I will politely disagree with the person who was condemning Damon Arnett. I freely admit, Damon Arnett, I sometimes shake my head at some of the things that he does with regards to coverage, but that was not something that I would fault him for with respect to that specific play.
Yeah, I mean his coverage was good. He's going up against a wide-bodied, tall receiver who, I mean, the ball is only put where the receiver can get to it, and he still has to make a circus catch to make it. That's what you want. I mean, 9 times out of 10, that's not going to be complete. And maybe even a higher percentage than 90, maybe 94, 95% of the time, that's not complete.
Right, and that was that circus catch by Johnson that was instrumental in the very onset of the game, because that was a contributing play that helped Penn State get into field goal range, and they capitalized to take their first lead of the game a few plays after that.
Right, and plays like that get the crowd juiced up. They get the belief going in the team that's the underdog, even though Penn State was at home, just a slight underdog, and it was that's one of those plays that really makes you believe you can win the game, and that's sort of as the higher ranked team, that's what you want to beat out of the other team early. And Ohio State was not able to do that because of that play, and sometimes you have to tip your cap. I mean, we saw it against Indiana a couple years ago where the receivers were just making ridiculous catches all over the field, even when they were well covered. And that's the kind of, you don't have to like it, but that is the kind of level that Ohio State raises in its opponents. I mean, these are the kinds of plays that these players know they have to make to beat this team. And more often than not, they don't, but sometimes they do. And when your team is as good as this year's Ohio State team is, and teams have to make those kinds of plays to beat you, you just have to applaud them when they do it, because it's not something that you're going to see every week.
And Penn State, they kind of went. Not that I mean Ohio State only won by 1 point, so I don't want to sound like Penn State. I mean in terms of what they were doing, but sometimes those special plays kind of didn't work out in their favor, because early in the game they introduced Tommy Stevens into the lineup, and he is the heir apparent to Trace McSorley, but he can kind of, in a similar vein, he's very athletic, can pretty much do it all as a runner receiver, and that they tried that backward pass, Tommy Stevens, to set up the double pass, if you will, and it resulted in a huge loss. So like you said, kind of echoing the thought that, teams sometimes they dig deep, and, what they need to do, they find a way to, pull out all the stops, whatever's necessary to play with Ohio State. Penn State was certainly doing all of that and more on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think that's a case where the Penn State coaches, they had something in mind they wanted to try. They had a package in there, and none of it, for whatever reason, none of it worked. Part of that was Ohio State blowing it up, but part of it was maybe the timing just being a little off. And it reminds me of, we'll talk about this more probably in a little bit when we kind of run through the game, but it reminds me of the Wildcat play that Ohio State ran when everything was going Ohio State's way, and everything was working. The defense is back on its heels, and you trot that out and you lose 3 yards on a Wildcat play, then you get a false start, and a drive that had looked so promising and reached all the way to the 16-yard line. Now suddenly you're kicking a field goal, and then you get the ridiculous penalty on Luke Farrell, and then you're kicking a longer field goal and missing. So I think sometimes coaches, they put in these gimmicks, and when they work, it's great and everybody loves it, and that's one of the great things about college football. But when they don't work, and everything else has been working, it really doesn't reflect well on the coaching staff.
It doesn't, because I mean it's just one of the simple realities. Taking college football out of the equation for the moment, don't overcomplicate things. Like that. Or to put it another way, if it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. For all of the critique and criticism of, sometimes, like I've referenced, for example, back, when he was the coach of the New York Giants, like Bill Parcells used to love just running the ball from pretty much the third quarter on. And his critics would say, how boring, and what he didn't care as long as he won the game. I mean, Tressel was a lot like that. And I'm not suggesting that Ohio State should have gone into their shell, because I think we both would acknowledge that Penn State, I mean, they were scrapping and fighting to the bitter end, and not that I expected any differently. But by the same token, I think there's a time and a place to pull out a quote unquote gimmick, rather than, like as you accurately stated, things were working fine, and it just seemed as though that they just, I will acknowledge unintentionally, but the results were still the same. They gummed up their own work, so to speak. I mean, they didn't need to be pulling the Wildcat out when their offense was, as you said, had the Penn State defense on their heels.
Yeah, and Penn State did the same thing early in the game when Ohio State's defense was on their heels. So, a little bit of, back and forth there. Penn State came out, they won the toss. They decided, we want the ball first. We want to put the pressure on Ohio State. We want to test their defense. No deferring for, James Franklin on that night. And, they came out and they put together a little bit of a drive. And, Ohio State eventually stopped it, got the punt. It was a terrible punt, and got the ball, and then quickly went 3 and out. And and then, so you're sitting here a few minutes into the game thinking, where's the shootout we were expecting? We're already seeing punts. We're not used to this. So we're not thinking that we're going to see a lot of punts tonight. And it was definitely a harbinger of things to come, because we saw a lot of punts on Saturday night.
We also saw a lot of drops early.
Yeah, we did.
I mean, Paris Campbell, he had a drop. Now I know we're going to sing their praises, rightfully so, later, but at the onset, Paris Campbell having a drop, KJ Hill having a drop at the beginning, and I know we haven't got to it yet, but all the Ohio State fans who lament, get the tight end involved in the passing game. Rashad Berry had not only a crucial drop, but I mean a pass that was batted up in the air that resulted in an interception. So it couldn't have started much worse for Ohio State offensively on Saturday night.
Yeah, and it was curious, because I remember thinking, I don't know, 2 or 3 series in, has Ohio State run the football yet? Have they even tried? And I know that part of that is predicated on what Penn State is showing them on the field, but you and I at least saw parts, and I saw a large part of the Illinois game against Penn State, and Illinois didn't seem too troubled about running the football against Penn State. Now, obviously, that's one of those games where Penn State's probably looking ahead to Ohio State. It's on the road. It's not the same circumstances. They're not as hyped up. They don't have the adrenaline going. They don't have the whiteout conditions and night game and all that at home, and all of the the sort of the juice that you get from that. But I definitely thought Ohio State was going to start probing, and maybe even that's why they didn't run that much against Tulane, that maybe they were saving some things for Penn State, but that was definitely not the case in the first quarter.
Yeah, the first quarter, I mean, it didn't matter. It was J.K. Dobbins and Mike Weber. They both had their struggles. J.K. Dobbins, even though he running the ball, I mean, he started to become more and more efficient as the game progressed. But I think it would be fair to say that a big part of his stellar play on Saturday night was more as that receiving option out of the backfield when Ohio State started using the screen very effectively, especially in the second half. J.K. Dobbins, contributed 2 touchdowns overall, but yeah, that Ohio State running game, they were really struggling. I don't know how much of it was because of what Penn State was doing schematically. I'm also of the opinion that, because we've talked about this in previous podcasts, that the whole zone read, it's not working because teams do not believe that Haskins is going to keep. And so they are crashing down on fill in the blank. It doesn't matter. It could be Dobbins. It could be Weber. But they're crashing down on the running back because they do not believe Haskins is ever going to keep.
Yeah, I agree with that. And we know from after the game, the coaching staff said that Penn State was blitzing 70 to 80% of the time, and a lot of that was run blitzes, double A-gap blitzes. They were bringing different guys, safeties, corners, linebackers, and really making sure that they were going to not let Weber and Dobbins get on track. But in Ohio State's first drive, actually I misspoke. They didn't go 3 and out. They hit Austin Mack on the first play for a first down, and then they went 3.
Yes.
The next 3 and out. But they didn't attempt a running play on the first series, although Haskins did run the ball on what was a pass play. He ran out of there, got 5 yards. The second drive, I think Weber ran it once. The third drive, I think Dobbins did have 1 carry. So they really were they would run one time early on an early down and then just completely go away from it, figuring that we're behind the chains, we have to throw the ball now. But I don't think that Ohio State in years past was that kind of team. Like if you go back to Ezekiel Elliott, a 2nd and 9, do you think Zeke might not touch the ball at all on the next 2 plays? I think Zeke's going to touch the ball.
Oh, easily. And it just goes to show that the offense, I think we're all getting used to it. And among them, when I say all of us are getting used to it, I'm going to include Coach Meyer in that sentiment. And I mean that with no disrespect, because let's face it, he is not used to having a quarterback without I'm not saying that Dwayne Haskins can't run, but he does not have nearly the mobility of the quarterbacks that he's had here while he was at Ohio State. I know one of the things that he lost when Tebow graduated was a mobile quarterback. He had John Brantley. So that was we've talked about that too, is that, why we thought Joe Burrow might have the leg up in the quarterback derby. But getting back to, the idea of, okay, well, Zeke would have probably touched it more. I think Coach Meyer is not only getting used to the fact that he doesn't have the most mobile of quarterbacks running his offense, but I think he's also still trying to get used to the fact that other people are calling the plays. And I know he has a headset. I know he's involved. I know he has a say. But for Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day to be the ones calling the plays, I think he's still getting used to that.
Yeah, and I don't really know how often he's stepping in and overruling or saying let's do or making a strong suggestion before the play call comes in. It's kind of hard to know that kind of thing. But one of the things that I thought throughout the first half is Penn State is really, really being aggressive, and we're not throwing any kind of misdirection. We're not throwing any kind of reverses, any screens, any tunnel screens, anything like that. Maybe a wheel route, something that will take advantage of that aggressiveness. And honestly, that's what got Ohio State the win in the fourth quarter. Was they started to do that. They said, okay, we're backed up. We need to go the distance. Let's throw a screen pass here. Let's throw a quick tunnel there. And I think there was a reverse in there at some point to Paris Campbell. It was just one after another where they were taking complete advantage of Penn State's aggressiveness and the blitzing, and it worked like a charm. So you wonder, why did it take them so long to adjust to that?
Yeah, I agree with the sense that, looking at some of the notes that I jotted down, that the very first touchdown that Ohio State scored, because they were down 13-0. I mean, and I want to add, fortunate to be down just that, because there were some missed field goals, there were some missed opportunities by Penn State where, if they had been more aggressive, let's say that the outcome could have been entirely different. But getting back to the idea of the screen plays, that was the screen. It was a screen pass to J.K. Dobbins in the second quarter that brought Ohio State, within a touchdown going into the second half. Like right before halftime, it was 13-7, and I can't emphasize this enough. Like Ohio State, as as much as they were struggling on offense, because as you said, the Penn State over aggressive defense was causing major problems for the Ohio State running game. Dwayne Haskins was being flushed from the pocket. He was being rushed in his throws. He was being inaccurate. He suffered an interception, which, in my opinion, wasn't really his fault, but it was an interception nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
Penn State puts up over 300 yards of offense in the first half on Ohio State, and Ohio State, they're going into halftime only down 6 points. Like I said, like they were. I mean, even Urban Meyer, I think, acknowledged as he was going, as we have to get better and everything, but it was because the defense was just they were taking everything that Penn State was throwing at them and more, but they were able to sometimes, make big plays to stop drives. As I said, Penn State sometimes was if not a unwitting accomplice, like they, sometimes were kind of helping out Ohio State by, missed field goals or being overly conservative on offense. So it was a rough first half, but fortunately for Ohio State, they were only down 13-7.
Yeah, Penn State takes a 3-0 lead early in the game. We talked about Juwan Johnson's big play on that drive. The next drive, the next deep drive into Ohio State territory, a missed field goal, and then they did hit another one to make it 6. And that was, a good job of the defense. They did a good job of bending without breaking on the night. The only time they really broke was the KJ Hamler big play for 93 yards, and of course that was a real bloody nose for the defense because it had played pretty well to that point, and you thought, that's the kind of thing that can maybe get in their heads, and maybe Penn State found something here. They did try to hit it earlier, and Ohio State had done a decent job on it. I know Fuller nearly jumped one of those and picked it off, but wasn't able to quite get there. But so it's 13-0, and you're thinking, man, Ohio State just has to get out of its own way. And you were watching what was going on, and you saw Penn State's doing some things right now that Ohio State needs to adjust to. Every time Rashad Berry went in motion, they were crashing to wherever he was going, and that really disrupted some of the wide run plays. And Rashad Berry did not have a great game. He did have one tremendous block in the game that helped a lot, but you talked about already the missed ball in his hands that ended up an interception, a long return that Johnny Dixon did a great job to run down from behind. But the other thing he was doing was he was getting blown up regularly on run plays in the blocking of those outside runs.
And you mentioned how Penn State accumulated that lead. Another guy who we were talking earlier about, the linebackers probably playing their best game, even though that they had their struggles as well. And I would be remiss if I didn't, mention Tough Borland. And the only reason I'm bringing that up is, as you mentioned, Penn State took that early 3-0 lead, and it was. I think you can picture it, because I know I certainly can, from Saturday night, is one of those patented Trace McSorley plays where he took off running, up the middle of the Ohio State defense. He went for 51 yards, and you could see Tough Borland struggling to keep up. And I don't know if it was that he was hurt or just I'm not judging the kid. He was just that slow, trying to catch up.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, with Penn State, they had the 13-0 lead already. Later on, we mentioned how Miles Sanders really, he was pretty much bottled up. It was that same Tough Borland who caused a fumble that Ohio State was able to recover, which led to the screen pass to J.K. Dobbins that brought Ohio State, from 13 down to 13-7.
Yeah, the 51-yard run for McSorley was embarrassing. You never want to see a quarterback scrambling for 51 yards, but I think what a lot of people don't realize is how fast and how quick and agile Trace McSorley is. We talked last week about how Penn State's uniforms are, they're engineered to make people look unathletic, and Trace McSorley's athletic. He's a fast guy. He can run, and he's always faster than he looks. And Tough Borland, probably not the fastest linebacker Ohio State's ever had, and a lot of people forget, he's coming off a pretty major Achilles injury.
Right.
So that's going to affect his running as well. But, for what the defensive scheme asks Tough Borland to do, that, keeping up with somebody fast in space is not what he's supposed to do. That's not totally on him, but credit Penn State for making that play, and then credit Tough Borland for not hanging his head. A lot of people will look at that long run by McSorley, and they look at the touchdown to Freiermuth later in the game, and they say, "Oh, Tough Borland shouldn't be playing." But Tough Borland had a good game, not a great game, but he had a good game overall. A lot of tackles, blew up some plays, he had a sack, and of course, with the game 13-0, he made a huge play, forced a fumble. Draymond Jones on the ground makes the recovery, sets up Ohio State, and J.K. Dobbins takes the screen pass and takes it to the house and gets the Buckeyes back in the game. And you could tell from the sound of the crowd that, the Penn State fans had been enjoying dominating the game, but now they knew they were only up 6 points, and that suddenly this was a game again.
And a player we haven't mentioned yet who was so critical to Ohio State's victory, even though, in terms of not necessarily scoring points, but, and I will commend Tony Gerdeman for the way that he assessed it, is not only is this guy tremendous at flipping water bottles, but he flipped the field position all night on behalf of Ohio State, and that was Drew Chrisman, who was robbed of the special teams player of the week. And I make no bones about it. The fact that he was averaging almost 48 yards a punt, I'm sure Jim Tressel, if he was still the head coach at Ohio State, he would be campaigning loudly for Drew Chrisman, because without Drew Chrisman, Ohio State, they probably would not have come out of that game with a victory, because he was that instrumental. And he, throughout the first half, like I said, Ohio State, they were doing whatever and whenever they could to stay close to Penn State. And I agree with you. I think psychologically, Penn State and their fans going into the halftime, only being up 13-7, had to be kind of second guessing themselves. But Drew Chrisman was largely instrumental in doing whatever he could to pin that Penn State defense back deep in their own territory whenever he punted the ball.
Right, and not only Ohio State being down 6, but also knowing the Buckeyes get the ball to start the second half.
Yes,
which is a big thing too. So now your 13-point lead is now 6, but the team has the ball and a chance to take the lead on the opening drive of the third quarter, which they did. You're right about Chrisman, but hey, thanks, Drew. Because of you, the defense has now given up 2 93-yard touchdowns this year.
I'm still in Drew's corner.
No, I'll tell you this: Haskins and Chase Young winning Player of the Week. Okay, I don't have a problem with it necessarily, but McSorley and Chrisman not winning Player of the Week, I do have a problem with that.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And we'll talk more about Chase Young because he was tremendous in this game.
Yes, he was.
So, the Buckeyes go into the half. They're down by 6. They come right out of the tunnel, and they drive right down the field. Again, starting to hit some of those shorter things and, just a much better rhythm offensively. And they go all the way down the field, and Dobbins runs it in. It's 14-13. All of a sudden, Ohio State's winning, and things are starting to look a little better. The crowd's a little quieter in Happy Valley, and you could tell they're getting a little more nervous, and it didn't really take all that long. It was, I guess it did. It was a 6-minute drive, but it was 13 plays, 75 yards, and Dobbins went the last 4 on the ground. But some really good plays in there, and also a very critical 4th and 1 picked up by J.K. Dobbins, who luckily he shimmies sideways at the last second to get a first down.
Yes,
because that was a very, very close play, and had he not turned sideways, he doesn't make the yard line to gain.
Yeah, that was a eerie foreshadowing of what was to come later on in the game when it came to another 4th and 1 that Ohio State barely made it. Which goes back to what I said a few moments ago, is that the idea of, the zone read, that it, not that on that play, it wasn't really so much of a zone read. And I want to I want to give a credit to Dave Biddle of Bucknuts, who I believe at Urban Meyer's press conference today asked Coach Meyer why on 4th and 1, why not get the quarterback underneath center, for the quarterback sneak, because it blows my mind, because I will freely admit that Urban Meyer, he is one of the architects of the spread offense that he has used so effectively in his previous coaching stops, even before Ohio State. But it always blows my mind that when you have short yardage, to have the quarterback taking a shotgun snap, and when you have 4th and 1, you've actually turned it into, like a 4th and 4, 4th and 5, whatever.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Right.
It's not as easy of a play, and it just and the logic of, okay, well, we're afraid of fumbling the snap because we don't practice it enough, which lends itself to, well, why don't you practice it?
Right.
Why don't you practice taking direct snaps from center? Like, by the way, that's how Dwayne Haskins, how he played in high school. It was directly under center. So
it's how they ended the game in victory formation.
Yeah, they practiced that. So you're trying to tell me you can't do that a little bit more on 4th and 1? Because I can assure you, the teams that Ohio State still has left on their schedule, Ohio State, they've had 2 big tests. They've come out on the positive end on both of them so far this season. I can assure you that when a couple of the other opponents that Ohio State has, they think nothing of running like their quarterback or a fullback, for example, which isn't even on Ohio State's roster anymore, on 4th and 1. But they don't run it from a shotgun formation; they run it directly from under center.
Mm-hmm. I will give them a pass on this if some point against Michigan they have a 4th and 1, they fake that handoff and throw a long pass for a touchdown.
Okay, there's your pass, and
if they're setting
remember
something up for later, I will give them a pass on this. But I agree completely. You got a guy that's Dwayne Haskins' size and his strength. All he has to do is get behind Demetrius Knox and lean forward. You got Jordan and Knox right there.
and Pridgeon too.
Yeah, just lean forward and you got your yard essentially. But it's too easy, especially in that environment, because those guys know that the snap count is going to come basically the same time every play because they can't hear. So they have to go with the silent count. So they gauge that silent count throughout the game. In this case, it looked like Pridgeon was making some kind of motion to the center of when to snap it, and then it was like wait a beat and then snap it. And it was, Penn State to me looked offside a few times just on first glance, because they had it timed so well that the ball wasn't even really behind Michael Jordan yet before they were already in the gaps. And that's one of the things that the team's going to have to work on a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, as you said, they came out, they were able to battle with J.K. Dobbins, pick up that 4th and 1, and then we already mentioned it earlier, but it was during the third quarter when Antonio Shelton of Penn State was ejected for targeting, and then I think you stated it very accurately. Ohio State, they kind of, for whatever reason, they went to the Wildcat, and the next thing you know, it just kind of one thing led to another. And a face mask call on Luke Farrell as he's on field goal protection, which pushes him back. And then maybe I'm the lone person here. I immediately, as soon as that happened, maybe it's just my fondness for Coach Tressel and the game that Drew Chrisman was playing. I immediately thought, okay, why not pin Penn State deep? Because no offense to Sean Nurnberger, but I genuinely didn't know what his range was. And, the missed field goal, I'm always of the mindset I want to, if at all possible, because the way Chrisman was dropping them so in such clutch fashion deep in Penn State's territory, I really wanted on that, when that penalty was assessed on Luke Farrell, fairly or unfairly, is, let's push Penn State back deep, because the defense, I thought, had the upper hand at that point. And it just seemed as though Ohio State assisted Penn State with regaining some of that lost momentum.
Yeah, in a big game on the road like that, it's kind of surprising to see Ohio State go for or attempt a long field goal. It's not that, I mean, Nurnberger's got plenty of leg, but he's not been accurate outside 40 yards during the course of his career. So I agree. As soon as they got the penalty and said, that'll push it back to a 48-yard field goal, I'm like, well, this is a punt then, because they're not going to kick a field goal from there. And I was surprised that they left him out there. And kudos to the coaching staff for giving him a shot and having the trust and faith in him to do it. And of course he didn't, but college kickers and all. But Ohio State had taken the 14-13 lead and then immediately got a 3-and-out. So things were looking up, and then they drove right down the field again and got to the 16-yard line, brought that Wildcat out. KJ Hill rushes, lost at 3 yards. Now, you're Penn State. You see that KJ Hill's back there. What do you think's going to happen? KJ Hill's going to run the football, right?
Right.
I mean, there's very little chance that they're wanting an H-back or a receiver or a running back taking the snap and then risking an exchange, with a running back in that situation. I'm not even sure if there was an empty backfield on that play. I can't recall, but it seemed like a telegraphed play. Then you get the false start, then you get the field goal that's good. Seemingly, you've now got a 17-13 lead, and you're now up more than a field goal. And if that had held true, that's huge. I mean, because of the momentum of the game would have continued to turn in Ohio State's favor. But instead, Farrell, he's just trying to make himself wide. He's got to block the inside guy. He's got to let the outside go. So he's got the arm extended. The guy just runs right into his hand. And I couldn't argue with the penalty. He got the hand in the face mask. And I don't think he knew too much about it, but that was a penalty. And it backs it up. And now all of a sudden, Penn State's got great field position. So it didn't really kickstart Penn State because it was again a 3-and-out, but it hurt Ohio State's momentum. It didn't help Penn State's momentum. It just hurt Ohio State's momentum. 3-and-out for Penn State. Ohio State comes back out. They go 3-and-out, and Penn State takes over, and then they Trace McSorley throws an incomplete pass on 4th and 1. I think that's one of the ones that Chase Young knocked down.
Yes.
And that was huge because that's at the Ohio State 24-yard line. And that at that point in the game, it's a 14-13 game. You figure Penn State could take the lead there.
Right. Yeah, it was when it came to the momentum, I don't think it was necessarily that Penn State regained it as much as Ohio State stalled their own.
Yes.
By their self-inflicted wounds, self-inflicted mistakes. And, it's easy to second guess the coaching staff, but I guess that they were so gung-ho to try and catch Penn State in a situation that maybe they weren't prepared for with the Wildcat. You've got Tate Martell, who, if you really wanted to run the ball, you still could. And, oh, by the way, if you really wanted to catch Penn State, get them crossed up, the idea of, some kind of run-pass option with Martell out of the Wildcat would have certainly, as you said, everyone knew KJ Hill is going to run the ball. Mm-hmm. With Martell, at least you would have, I don't want to say the element of surprise, because I think everyone would have presumed a run.
Yeah.
But the threat of the pass would have been much more viable with Martell versus KJ Hill.
Yeah, it's one of those things that Ohio State does that drives me a little bit crazy is I think that they take options off the table that the defense has to worry about. They do it a lot, and you'll see it a lot like on a 3rd and 4 play or a 3rd and 3 play with an empty backfield. Don't you want to at least have Dobbins in there as a potential threat to go pick up a first down on the ground? I mean, I would want him back there, but then they go out and split him out, and now it's like, well, it's a pass. There's no chance that this is a running play because that's not JT Barrett back there.
Right. I agree with you.
And I think some of the formations are still a holdover from when, JT Barrett was in. It's like, okay, this is what we're going to go with, and this is our formation for it. No, put J.K. Dobbins back there. You've at least got them. They have to think about that. They have to think about number 2 coming at him because, I mean, this guy can rip off 3 or 4 yards easy on any given play. So, I don't know. I don't want to get too far of a digression, but the big play for Chase Young was huge, a huge play in the game, but ultimately didn't help much because Ohio State ends up, going behind again, as Penn State's able to make it 20-14 on the next drive after Ohio State took the ball away. They weren't able to get anywhere with it, and Penn State came down and scored. And then it's 2014, and Ohio State, tries to put together a drive. They cross midfield, and then they get the 4th and 1, and they try to run a zone read play, and Haskins keeps the ball, but he gets no gain on the 4th and 1. And the play looked like it was blown up pretty early on, but if you watch that play again, if Haskins runs to the outside and doesn't turn it up, he might have scored.
Right.
I mean, there was no one out there. I mean, Penn State all crashed down inside, and I think that's just the inexperience of running that zone read. He's like, oh, I got to follow my blocker. Well, no, in this case, your blocker is blown up. Just keep going, But that was huge for Penn State. They end up coming down and scoring again, and they make it 26-14, and now you're starting to get a little concerned. There's time's running down, double-digit lead late in the game, and it's the fourth quarter, and it just doesn't look like it's going to happen for Ohio State at this point. But credit to Ohio State, they kept digging, they kept getting stops, even when they weren't able to move the ball offensively. They were getting stops, and but the team just they never quit. They came back. It was 26-14 the very next drive. Of course, Ohio State's always starting from the 25 because teams are not wanting to give Ohio State's return men a chance to return those. So it's at the 25. Haskins hits C.J. Saunders. Then he's starting to hit Mack. Then you get a pass interference penalty, and then the big play of the game and of the season, really the season-saving play so far this year. You get Haskins, who's flushed out of the pocket, steps up, makes a throw that's not great, but Ben Victor goes up, makes a great catch on a ball that's a bit behind him, bounces off the defender, and then follows some unbelievable downfield blocking and shows a little bit more speed than I think we ever thought that Ben Victor had, and scores a huge touchdown, and Happy Valley goes dead quiet again.
I have to ask you this is something that Urban Meyer mentioned, how in the post-game press conference, he mentioned how the idea of, he was looking up in the stands and it was loud and the white pom-poms were, going full force kind of a thing. And that was at the 8-minute mark. So that I'm just going to ask you, because that's I'm not saying that I thought it was done. Mm-hmm. But do you believe that's when it was 26-14? Do you think that's what he was referencing? Was that 26-14, like before that drive began, that that's when he was thinking like this might be done, this might be over, like at that time, that 8-minute mark in the fourth quarter?
I think that's probably what he was thinking. My personal thought at that point was Ohio State doesn't get a touchdown on the next drive, this game's over. It has to be a touchdown on this drive, and it only took 5 plays?
Right. Yeah. It was you're absolutely correct, because it was 5 plays. Ben Victor, as you said, it
was 3 plays. It was
right. Yeah. He was, Haskins flushed out of the pocket and he threw slightly behind. Ben Victor went up, made a great catch. And as that play was unfolding, I was just grateful for the fact, okay, he not only caught the ball, but he made a first down, and then started winding and reversing field. And as you said, was the beneficiary of some tremendous downfield blocking. We were critical of Rashad Berry earlier. This is where we have to give him some praise, because he definitely had a crucial block that helped spring Ben Victor. And I will also confess that as Ben Victor was running towards the end zone, I kept thinking he's going to get caught from behind, because I'm sure it's faster, but he did not look. I mean, we were talking earlier about KJ Hamler, like, okay, that was some speed, right?
Yeah.
Like on that 90. It did not look to me like Ben Victor was moving that fast, but he was moving fast enough to outrun that Penn State secondary and take it into the end zone to make it 26-21. And it was, as you said, like when that drive began, Ohio State was down with only 8 minutes by the time Ben Victor scored, there were 6 minutes and 42 seconds. I mean, so that's all of a sudden, I think, psychologically, I wasn't there. I know you weren't there. We were watching it, from different places, but I agree with what, listening to Tom Moore, he said it seemed as though the Penn State fans, that's when they realized, oh, blank, because all of a sudden it's like, here we go again. Here we go again.
Yeah.
Like we had them down, and they're right back in it. And he said I trust Tom because he was there. Psychologically, just the wave of emotion that I'm not saying that they were all negative, but that they were feeling, okay, it's happening again.
Yeah, and it was 3 plays. It took a minute 18 off the clock. Just a quick pass to Saunders, a quick pass to Austin Mack, then another pass for Mack, intended for Mack, that was a pass interference on Castro Fields on that play where he grabs Mack coming out of his break, which I remember thinking at the time, did somebody run the wrong route, because that thing was way closer to a defensive back than it was to any Ohio State player. Then they talked about the flag and they showed it, and I thought, okay, they're going to call defensive holding, but they did call the 15-yarder, the pass interference. And then, of course, Castro Fields was not he was done dirty on the next play because he was the defender on the play for Victor to catch the ball. And you mentioned Rashad Berry's tremendous block. Paris Campbell had a tremendous block in that play, and Victor's one of these rangy guys who's probably a ton faster than he looks. He just kind of glides. I mean, they used to say that about Terrell Pryor. You remember, they say he kind of glides when he runs, and he doesn't look like he's running fast, but the next thing you know, you're falling 5, 10, 15 yards behind him as you run down the field. And it kind of looked like that, but it also looked like Victor let up knowing that he had the end zone. Like, it looked like he kind of let up, but great block by Campbell, great block by Rashad Berry. Even Johnny Dixon kind of got in the way of somebody that was pursuing from behind to kind of give him that extra couple yards he needed. And, we haven't talked too much about Victor this year. He's a guy that, I'm not a big recruiting follower, but he's a guy that came out of Florida that I had heard of, that I kind of expected big things of. But to this point, we haven't seen much from the junior. And he started to show it in glimpses. You've seen it the last few weeks. You've seen, he got a lot of hype in the preseason camp. He was in a lot of the videos and the hype videos and things. And you saw it against TCU. He had that stop and go route where he was wide open, but Haskins missed him. And then you saw him with of course, it was a blown coverage against Tulane, but he had a long touchdown pass catch against Tulane, and now this one. So we may be seeing the emergence of Benjamin Victor.
Coach Meyer, he alluded to the fact that one of the things that was holding Victor back was his reluctance or flat refusal sometimes to block, and the fact that in recent weeks, Victor has, in the words of Paris Campbell, has become one of them. Mm-hmm. One of those hard-nosed wide receivers who is willing to do what it takes, and that quite often involves blocking downfield. And I agree with you. I think this might be, the beginning emergence of Ben Victor, because let's face it, a lot of these wide receivers that are on the roster presently, they're going to be gone a year from now. So Ben Victor, even though he was highly touted coming out of high school, he hasn't shown up until this point that kind of, the hype has kind of transcended the results on the field. Mm-hmm. But Saturday night, with that big play, he kind of took a major step forward. Definitely into the legendary performance category for Ohio State Buckeyes. With people will always remember that reception and that long winding touchdown run that helped seal, or I should say, helped get Ohio State back in the game.
Absolutely. So Penn State gets the ball back with 6:42 to play, and Ohio State's got all 3 timeouts. Penn State just wants to run some clock. They're only able to run 2:07 off the clock on this next drive. McSorley started out with another long run, 13 yards. The next play was no gain, but Chase Young grabbed his face mask on the way through, so he got 15 more yards there. Then he ran, he tried to pass the ball, but he was beyond the line of scrimmage. They called him for the illegal forward pass, but they also called offensive pass interference. Now, I didn't know this rule, but when the quarterback is beyond the line of scrimmage and throws the ball, there's no pass interference. So it actually cost Ohio State 10 yards because it's a 5-yard penalty and lost it down instead of a 15-yard penalty. That could have been big because on the very next play, McSorley ran for 9 yards. So he got back the 5 that he lost plus 4 more. Then he threw an incomplete pass with great coverage from Sean Wade. Then it became 4th down. Penn State takes a delay of game penalty, punts the ball down to the 4-yard line. Only took 2:07 off the clock, and Ohio State didn't have to burn a timeout.
Right. I mean, it was educational, if not infuriating, to find out, because as watching that game, hearing, oh, this actually, works in Penn State's favor. And I'm thinking, yeah, it's like, I never knew that was, I'm not disputing the rule, but who knew? And, here I was thinking, okay, good. They're really going to be pushed back, but no, that wasn't the case. As you mentioned, Chase Young, with that face mask, which was unfortunate, but we're going to be singing Chase Young's praises here as we get closer to our conclusion of the game.
Absolutely,
because we've talked about so many other people. It is for certain that Chase Young, without Chase Young's performance on Saturday night, Ohio State does not pull this game out. The fact that when Penn State punted to Ohio State, there was only 4 minutes and 35 seconds left. They're back on their own 4-yard line, and I don't want to say that Dwayne Haskins played poorly. I know he had the interception, but I will still contend, it's unfortunate that interception is, for him to be leveled against him when the reality is it went off of Rashad Berry's hands. Did Dwayne Haskins play his best game Saturday night? No, but I will say, because we're going to get to it right now, Dwayne Haskins certainly saved his best for last, and he certainly saved it for when Ohio State needed it the most.
Yeah, he grew up a lot in the second half of this game. Ohio State with the ball, 4:35 to play. Now you've got your entire playbook. At the 4-yard line, you got to think of your Penn State. Let's send some people. Maybe they hand it off here thinking they're close to the end zone. Maybe we can get a safety out of this. Perfect play call. Ohio State goes with a screen pass to J.K. Dobbins. He takes it 35 yards all the way out to the 39-yard line. Huge play. Great play call. Completely caught Penn State in the exact situation they didn't want to be in.
Right. I mean, we were lamenting Ohio State not capitalizing on Penn State's over-aggressive defense, and at the right time, when they needed it the most, they called that screen. And J.K. Dobbins, as I said, he scored 2 touchdowns, but that play, even though he didn't score points, that might have been just as equally important, just simply because of the fact he, number one, got Ohio State deep from within their own territory, and number two, was able to put Ohio State in excellent field position with still plenty of time remaining on the clock.
Yeah, got the team away from the Penn State student section, and really, really made the crowd, shut up and sit down for a minute. Getting it all the way out to the 40-yard line, basically. Then Ohio State's got its full playbook. Hand off to Dobby on the next. I call him Dobby because he's my house elf. He runs for 7 on the next play. You got 2nd and 3. Haskins throws an incomplete pass. Then, of course, I think that was the Dobbins run of the 7-yard run for Dobbins. I think that's where he got the turf in his face mask and came out. And Weber came in at 3rd and 3 and ran for 11 yards. Then on the next play, Haskins hits Campbell for 14. Again, another one of those little quick passes. He tried to hit him again on the next play, but it was incomplete. Then Dobbins ran for 5. Then Haskins hit KJ Hill. And the block of the game from Terry McLaurin, who takes out 3 Penn State Nittany Lions and springs Hill into the end zone. It's a 2.5-minute drive, 8 plays, 96 yards.
And here's the thing. It wasn't until after, just the hoopla and the hysteria of winning the game. And maybe you noticed it because I was just just reveling in the fact that Ohio State had come back. By no means did I think the game was over. I want to make that clear too.
Oh,
is
for
that,
sure.
like I thought, okay, they've got plenty of time. During the broadcast, I'm not saying that he was inaccurate, but Kirk Herbstreit made a point of pointing out Austin Mack's block, which was good.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't until after the game and just kind of thinking like, oh my God, I can't believe Ohio State pulled that one out, that you started seeing the shots of Terry McLaurin, as you said, making the 3-block masterpiece that truly was was consequential for KJ Hill scoring that touchdown.
Yep.
I mean, that that's, and when we talk about what you look for in a wide receiver, I was critical of the fact that Ohio State had drops earlier in the game. You referenced, Paris Campbell having some crucial plays. KJ Hill had a drop earlier in the game, but I've mentioned it before. I will always say that KJ Hill, I think, is, out of that entire wide receiver group, he may not be the flashiest. He may not necessarily have the best speed or the best hands, but I just think KJ Hill usually game in, game out is the most consistent. And when Ohio State needed it the most, KJ Hill came up with the biggest play. And can't say enough positive things about the unselfish downfield blocking of Terry McLaurin, because without him, that's not to say that KJ Hill wouldn't have got in, but I don't think it would have been nearly as easy as it looked.
Right. There were 3 great plays on that one individual touchdown, and that's, Mack came, and they talked about this on the broadcast. Mack took the one guy and allowed the other guy to go one-on-one with Hill. Now, Hill gave him a great shoulder fake, thinking, oh, he's probably going to run out of bounds here, stop the clock, whatever, on this last drive, but he just gave him like a little shoulder shimmy and just went right by him. So you had Mack making a play, you had Hill making that little fake, and then you had McLaurin cleaning up the 3 players in one block, and all of that combined to get KJ Hill in the end zone. And my first thought, and I tweeted this, we scored too damn fast.
I thought it, but I was also grateful I would rather be ahead than behind in that situation.
Sure.
And I also really thought Ohio State, when it came to the 2-point conversion, was going to be much better than what the end result was.
Well, and it may have been a lot different had they not gotten the delay of game penalty, and that was a point of contention. The coaches said, the coaches were thinking that the play clock didn't start at the proper time. And watching it at home, it's kind of hard to gauge these things, but you kind of get a clock in your head as you go, and it didn't seem like it should have been a delay of game in that amount of time. And so I had wondered if it was properly reset. The coaches obviously didn't think so. Tony Gerdeman talked about it on the post-game show, about that the coaches were all pumping their hand up in the air like reset the clock. And a 2-point conversion from the 2-yard line versus from the 7-yard line is much different in what you can play call there.
Right.
So They go for 2, they don't get it, and now a field goal can beat you. So now at this point in the game, both teams have missed a 2-point conversion, both teams have missed a field goal, and so those kind of cancel each other out in my mind. So I'm not worried too much about it. I'm like, well, their team did it, our team did it. Here we go. Can McSorley get them in field goal range in this amount of time? My first thought was, I'm glad we got a lot of timeouts left because we might need them for another offensive drive. And sure enough, McSorley comes out and hits Freiermuth for 27 yards on the first play, and he's across midfield. Jordan Fuller makes the stop. Then huge play. Chase Young, sack on the next first down play, knocks them back across midfield, and an incomplete pass. It's 3rd and 14. McSorley runs the ball, gets 9 again, another big run from Trace McSorley, and now it's 4th and 5, and then you get the timeout extravaganza. Penn State calls timeout. What are we going to do? Ohio State goes back out late. They see how they line up. They give them a fake blitz, wait till the last second. They call timeout, and then Penn State calls timeout again. And I'm thinking, this is great because, Penn State's, spending timeouts, and really all it's doing is when you're an offensive player, you want to get out there and make the next play. and it really helps the defense settle in, and it doesn't allow the offense to maintain its rhythm. So all of that I thought was good for Ohio State. And it's 4th and 5, and everyone in the world is thinking the same thing. Trace McSorley is going to either run the football or pass the football, but it's going to be Trace McSorley because he's been doing everything in this game.
Yeah, it definitely. I mean, it's still shocking that you took the ball out of the best player on the field for your offense. You took the ball out of his hands.
Right. And I don't even think it was a pass option on this play because Ohio State saw it, and you heard the players talking about it after the game, that they saw zone read. They said this is what they're going to do. They're going to zone read. And they absolutely had both options on the zone read covered with the stunt that they ran. McSorley hands the ball to Sanders, who hadn't been effective all game long, but he ran right into Chase Young, who had looped inside. But Ohio State had the quarterback covered as well on that zone read.
Yeah, and what could have? I mean, we talked about, like on 4th and short, it would be great if Ohio State stunned somebody like Michigan with a pass. I mean, that's kind of, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but on social media, a Penn State fan was, I don't think he was being really snarky about it, but he was just saying, coach, tough, I can't remember how he phrased it, but he really thought that Penn State was going to throw the ball, like that, like you said, I think everyone expected McSorley to keep, but if McSorley had off the zone read, had been able to, do a play action and hit a receiver, I don't know if Ohio State would have been able to stop it short, of the 4th and 5.
Mm-hmm.
But, getting back to the Penn State fan who was, as James Franklin was walking off the field and then James Franklin took offense to it, and not that he climbed up, but he took a step towards the fan and was grabbed by whoever his security detail was.
Yeah, they kind of helped him out there because that's not something that he wants to. That would have been a bad move and potentially a devastating move had he actually gone after that fan.
Right, and listening to the audio, the fan didn't really say anything overly. I mean, he wasn't profane, and he wasn't really, really nasty about it. He just, thought, that, you made a mistake, coach, or whatever. I can't remember.
Yeah, it's
precisely
a
what he
bad
said.
call, coach. I love you, but that was a bad call.
Yeah.
And that's
and
probably
James
not
Franklin.
James Franklin
Right.
doesn't want to hear that at that point.
Well, even prior to the altercation with the fan, what I've seen is as he was walking off, I'm not sure if he was addressing the media, if he was addressing, but he was like, "Can you give me a minute?" Just kind of, and it's tough. I mean, as Ohio State fans, we're on the other side of that feeling. We're thinking this is great. This is 2 years in a row of games that you thought that you had won, that you have blown fourth quarter leads and watched your team lose by 1 point.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I'm not saying I agree with you that I think James Franklin is probably a very good thing that he did not, go any further after that fan. But I certainly understand. I mean, there's just those feelings are very raw, and they're at the top of the surface. So, if anything, it'd be easy. It's easy for me to sit here and say, oh, he should just block it out. But we're not the ones that coming out on the short end, 2 years in a row by 1 point.
Right. And this is his livelihood, and it's his team that just essentially went behind in the Big Ten East race by 2 games. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's not the best time to tell your coach, hey, that was a bad call. Do you think he didn't realize he would have rather had a better play there? I mean, maybe just shut up and let him walk to the tunnel. Maybe opine to your friends and maybe you don't have to let the coach know where he went wrong in that game. And honestly, there were a few other times that I thought maybe Franklin didn't make the best decision. Like he did go for the 4th and 1 where Chase Young knocked it down where he seemingly was in field goal range. He did have a 4th down and 1 around midfield with 20 seconds to play in the first half, and decided to punt the ball. So there
Yeah.
were other opportunities there, and they say one play doesn't win or lose a game because you can point to a lot of plays in that game that could have gone differently and didn't. I mean, there was a long pass on a wheel route to Miles Sanders, and he almost brought it in one-handed. There were a lot of plays that could have gone differently in that game. So yes, everybody will point to the 4th and 5 play call. I'm sure he would have rather had the ball in McSorley's hands. But I think you have to give Ohio State credit for correctly diagnosing the play and calling the right defense.
Yeah, I do give credit to Ohio State for doing that. And I believe it was tonight I saw something on Twitter that Penn State's offensive coordinator, I might get the name mispronounced, Ricky Rane. He's Joe Moorhead's replacement.
Mm-hmm.
I believe I saw something where he said how Coach Schiano got the better of him against Ohio State with the final play call.
Mm-hmm.
And I also want to give James Franklin credit because for all of it hasn't changed. I truly believe that the emotions were very raw and he was hurting just as much, if not more so, than his players. He did not throw his offensive coordinator under the bus. I mean, he fully acknowledged, we could have called it different. Like I should have called it differently. That's on me. He took the fall on it. So I respect that rather than
right.
Trying to alibi or whatever. So.
Sure. Now, I mean, he could have said, you know what, I don't think so. That I don't like that play. Let's go with something else, and overruled it. But to him, at the moment, he probably thought, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that. The thing is, if you're Ohio State, you're not expecting a run necessarily in that situation. You're putting the chess match is this. You try to picture what you would do on the other side, and then you try to figure out what you would do differently so that it would seem like something you wouldn't do. And so a running play, I wasn't expecting, when they lined up on 4th and 5, I wasn't expecting a running play at all. I was expecting either a quarterback draw or some kind of a pass play. And I didn't expect anything beyond maybe a fake handoff to Sanders other than that. And for them to come out and do a zone read and give the ball, like I said, they had both of those covered. If it was an RPO, I don't know if they had the passes covered, but certainly McSorley thought they did if that was the case.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
I don't know if there was a pass option on that play, but if there was, McSorley, whatever he saw at the line of scrimmage, he gave the ball to Sanders, so he thought that was his best option on the play. So anyway you look at it, Ohio State won that matchup. The great Shaman comes out with a big play call on defense. This is a little bit of an inside joke at Hazen Cannon where we had Tony Gerdeman run an across the field through the Amazon transcriber, and Greg Schiano translated to Great Shaman, which I thought was great because it's like, oh, Tennessee turned down a chance to have the Great Shaman as their head coach.
There you go.
So again, then Ohio State takes over on downs, and because Penn State used 2 timeouts there, they get to start kneeling down.
Yep.
And the game is over.
The game was over, and as you said, now Ohio State, let's hope that they handle prosperity better this year than they did last year after a close victory over Penn State.
Yeah, the emotional win over Penn State last year, of course, came before the trip to Iowa. This year, they get Indiana at home, a little bit different animal. We'll get into Indiana just in a moment. Avoiding letdown certainly will be on the minds of everyone. And the good thing about this win is they did so many things wrong in this game that the coaches can yell at them about all week. Then I think that I don't expect anybody to be taking anything for granted going into the Indiana game. Don't know. I know they said that Draymond Jones would be fine. He's probable for Saturday. I wouldn't play him unless they have to because he did turn an ankle, get rolled up a little bit in that Penn State game. The funny thing was the crowd was sort of booing as if he were wasting time, which Penn State had the lead at the time, so wouldn't they want him to waste time? You would think that they would want the clock to run. I don't think they were trying to go hurry up there or anything. I don't think he was blowing up the rhythm of the offense. But, an injury for Draymond, which we never want to see, especially with Nick Bosa already on the shelf. But Chase Young, we promised we'd talk about him, and you can't you can't imagine a better coming out party for a guy who had kind of he had some big plays against really inferior competition early in the season, but he had kind of disappeared, and you weren't really sure you were going to get a quality season out of Chase Young. But on the biggest stage, he goes out and performs 6 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, including the game-ending tackle for loss, broke up 2 critical pass plays, and had 2 quarterback hurries. Just a monster game for Chase Young, and very deserving of Defensive Player of the Week in the Big Ten.
Without question. And, we talked about, some of the mistakes that were made by Chase Young, but Urban Meyer likes to say that he never gets on players for making mistakes when they're playing hard, going fast. We talked about the face mask penalty that it seemed like it was going to hurt Ohio State more, but it really didn't. Mm-hmm. And then late, and when Penn State, when they were driving, he was almost called for a face mask again, but it turned out that he was actually, like he had only, grazed the shoulder pad.
Right, grabbed the shirt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Chase Young, when Ohio State needed big plays from the defensive line, he stepped up big and showed. I know you mentioned that you don't really get into the whole recruiting thing, but Chase Young demonstrated why he was such a highly touted recruit. And this was, if we're going to say that Ben Victory had a kind of an emergence, this certainly qualified for Chase Young as well.
Yeah, quietly a good game also for Jonathan Cooper, who had a couple tackles for loss. I thought that he played well. I thought the starting linebackers all played their best game of the year. Malik Harrison had 8 tackles. Borland had 8 tackles. So those two, along with Jordan Fuller, led the team. Harrison also had a half a sack, half a tackle for loss. Borland, of course, had a tackle for loss and a sack and a forced fumble. So really good stuff from the starting linebackers. And again, in a mixed bag, admittedly. Pete Werner with 5 tackles, and he had a couple of really nice plays in the first half of that game to keep Penn State, sort of behind the sticks. And, I thought Damon Arnett played pretty well in this game before he went out with the injury. Draymond Jones had his normal, he was his normal, self gumming things up inside. I really thought that the interior defensive line played really well, including Hamilton and Landers when they were in there. They didn't necessarily get a lot of tackles, but they sort of allowed those linebackers to flow and get those tackles. I mean, I don't think the linebackers are coming away. What do we have? 8, 16, 21 tackles for the starting linebackers. I don't think that happens without good interior line play. So good job for the defense. They really showed up. They did give up the one long pass play where Wade got beat to the inside on the slant, and then Pryor took a bad angle and allowed Hamler to go the distance. But overall, you were coming in against the number 1 offense in the country. They were at home at night in the whiteout, and you held them to 26 points. Not bad.
Not at all. And I completely agree with you when you say that let's hope that this coming weekend against Indiana, Ohio State can rest as many of these guys as much as possible, because the bumps and bruises are kind of starting to accumulate regardless of what area on the defense. They're starting to accumulate everywhere.
Yeah, and Urban even said that Chase Young was nursing a bit of an ankle injury, but you would have never known it the way he played on Saturday night. Great game for Chase. Couldn't have been more happy for the kid, because he really had was starting to look like, what's all the hype about, the last few weeks. But he came to play on Saturday.
Certainly.
All right, Chip. This might be the longest recap we do all year.
Well, one last thing. Only one last thing I'm going to say is mark your calendars for November 23rd, 2019, because that's when Penn State comes back to town. I don't know if my blood pressure can take another game like this 3 years in a row, but I'm certainly not going to discount it. Mm-hmm. But I certainly wish Penn State the best of luck the rest of the year. I'm sure that they are going to be a very difficult out for the rest of the Big Ten, because they gave everything Ohio State could possibly handle on Saturday night.
We'll have to see what Tommy Stevens holds in store, because we are done with Trace McSorley.
Fortunately, that's a positive.
His 17 years at Penn State are over. All right, Chip. So avoiding the letdown, we got to talk about Indiana before we get out of here. It's been a bit of a long show, but it was I think a game worthy of a long Silver Bullets
Certainly.
podcast. So
Yes.
Indiana comes in to Ohio Stadium. Not a great offense. Scoring offense is 81st in the country, 28 points a game. Rushing offense is only 63rd in the country, having 179 yards a game. Passing offense 68th in the country, 233 yards a game, and total offense 66th in the country. They average 412 yards per game. Scoring defense. Now the defense for Indiana is something that's there was one thing that stuck out at me, and it may be the product of other things, but they're 41st in the country in scoring defense, 21.2 points allowed per game. I got to think Ohio State can do better than that. 67th in rush defense, 158 yards they're giving up a game. I got to hope that Ohio State can finally get another 150-yard rushing game. That was a bit of an abomination running-wise at Penn State, but not totally unexpected given the environment. Just unexpected given Penn State's performance on defense up to this point. Here's where Indiana gets interesting, Chip. Pass defense is ranked 14th in the country, only giving up about 164 yards per game. That I found very interesting.
Well, let's see how that ranking looks after Saturday afternoon against Ohio State. And because I don't mean to sound disrespectful to Indiana because they're off to a 4-1 start, but let's look at who they have defeated. Their wins have been over FIU, over Virginia, Ball State, and this past weekend against Rutgers, and their lone loss of the season was, at Michigan State. Now let's look at the one common opponent that Ohio State and Indiana have, and that is Rutgers. Whereas Indiana defeated Rutgers 24-17 this past weekend, Ohio State handled Rutgers much, much, much easier. Now, that's not meant to condemn Indiana because a win is a win. And I think it would be fair to say that Indiana, I think they kind of took their foot off the gas a little bit in the second half, which their coach, Tom Allen, kind of said, that we didn't finish. And I also believe that Tom Allen, he kind of made his mark within the coaching ranks as a defensive guy. So I think Indiana is going to do anything and everything they possibly can to slow down the Ohio State offense. But I think it would be fair to say they haven't seen an offense as varied and as deep and as fast and explosive as Ohio State yet this season.
All right, that's all fair points. I also want to point out that Indiana played Rutgers on the road, and you don't just go into Piscataway, Chip. And okay, you do. You do just go into Piscataway and beat Rutgers. Sorry to Chris Ash, but I said this at one point. I think it was 24-7, and I said, "How fired is Chris Ash this season?" Because he looks like he's not going to make it through the year. Rutgers has just been abysmal. But credit for Chris Ash to get his team to fight back and make it a one-score game by the end, because they were getting beat pretty good early in that game. I was watching some of that, and then I couldn't take any more and turned the channel. I think I got interested in Syracuse and Clemson around that time or something.
Can't blame you for that one.
Yeah. So just to finish the thought, 25th in total defense for Indiana. They're only allowing 322 yards per game. Again, not a murderer's row of opponents there. Michigan State being the top opponent that they faced, and that was at home in Indiana, but they still lost by a couple touchdowns.
Yes, and they've got they do have some talent on offensively. I mean, like they have a dual threat quarterback, Peyton Ramsey, who's
man.
What?
Dual threat quarterback again?
Another dual threat quarterback, but he is not nearly, I think, even before you kind of lost interest, I think you would agree with me that when I wouldn't even, in terms of, his physical stature in comparison to Trace McSorley, he is not nearly as fast. He's not nearly, I think it would be fair to say, like his physical dimensions are not, like, I don't know, like how much pounding Peyton Ramsey could take that a Trace McSorley could, but I'm sure, Trace McSorley has provided the blueprint to every Ohio State opponent going forward. When it comes to, if you have a mobile quarterback, use him against Ohio State. So I'm sure that Indiana is going to try and do whatever they can. They're going to pull out all the stops against Ohio State. They don't really have a dominant running back. I mean, they're more, kind of like running backs by committee. They've got Stevie Scott, Ronnie Walker Jr., Mike Majette. They've got some good wide receivers. I think probably, I would say probably Nick Westbrook is probably their best wide receiver, but they have a few others, Donovan Hale, a guy who definitely is in contention for name of the year, Wap Fillier. It's like they've got some talent, but I just don't see them being Mike DeBoer is their offensive coordinator. I don't see them being in the category of Penn State in terms of being explosive offensively. So I am hoping, I'm not saying that this is going to be the case, but I am hoping this is the kind of game where if Ohio State can get a substantial lead by the half, that maybe you give your starters the first series of the third quarter and get people out of the game, because no disrespect to Indiana, but there's some big games still remaining beyond this weekend, that go into November. You already mentioned, Draymond Jones, talked about Damon Arnett, talked about, Chase Young. I would rather get as many of the young players in to get them much needed game experience in the event that something happens and we need to play them, in an actual game. I would rather that's always my mindset. I would rather let's play the backups as much as possible. It's just one of those things where you never know, where, fluke injuries can take place, and I'd rather get them in some much needed game experience whenever we can.
All right. Well, Peyton Ramsey completing a good percentage of his passes, 71%. So he's throwing a lot of those quick passes. He's 6'2", 210. He's a sophomore. He's a McSorley light running. I saw McSorley do something I didn't think I'd ever see, and that's a quarterback running out of the tackle of Draymond Jones. I don't think you're going to see Peyton Ramsey do that if Jones plays. It's just one of those things where Ohio State just needs to come out and play with enough intensity and just try to squash Indiana early. Don't let them get a belief that they can stay in the game. And I think they will ultimately. This is a game Ohio State should win. I don't think we're going to see the big hangover. Certainly the crowd will be behind Ohio State next weekend rather than the hostile crowd of Iowa that happened last year after the Penn State game. So that's going to be helpful as well. And again, I think that Ohio State legitimately, the coaching staff probably saw enough things that they can yell about this week to not let this team rest on its laurels. And also one of those things is they can point to last year's Iowa game and say, look what happened last year. You don't believe your hype. You haven't won anything. I think Meyer said today they didn't win the Super Bowl. They beat a good team. And you still have it all to do. And just because they have taken, I guess pole position in the Big Ten East, they haven't won it yet. Still some big games ahead, and to stub your toe against an Indiana would be just opening the door wide open for Penn State to climb back in it later in the season. So, Chip, with all of that, I don't think we need to go too far into the X's and O's of Indiana and Ohio State. Give me your score prediction.
All right. I've been so stellar with this, so far this season anyway. So, but in all fairness, I think Ohio State, they can win this game, by the beginning of the second half and play Tate Martell. Who's to say, that, we don't, necessarily, see, some more of those true freshmen, that Urban Meyer, has been singing the praises of. But I'm going to go Ohio State 49, Indiana 21.
Okay, yeah, you're very close on what we're thinking going into the game, although we both overestimated the scoring in the Penn State-Ohio State game. But I think we weren't alone in that. I think everybody, certainly on social media, everybody was expecting a shootout. And when you got into halftime and it was 13-6, I think a lot of people were really surprised that it was such a low scoring game, and it didn't really get too much more in the second half, each team scoring a couple touchdowns. So Going into this week, I think you're pretty close, and I think I'm going to say 45-20 Ohio State in this game. I think that the guy that they'll want to kind of shut down is they're going to want to shut down Stevie Scott a little bit. He's getting 92 yards a game as a freshman, and I think they're going to want to take Peyton Ramsey's run out of the equation. I think they're going to probably have some things that they want to prove to themselves in the quarterback run game, and I think that they're not going to rest on their laurels, and I think that they're going to. I really think there's an underlying anger to this team this year, where they a lot of the stuff that happened in preseason is still, I think, at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and I think that they're taking this season very seriously. And what really kind of makes me think that this could be a special year for Ohio State is 1st and 10 at their own 4-yard line, and it was no problem at all. In that environment, after struggling all game long, it was not a big deal. They just went down and did it and took care of it. And they all talked about it after the game, how they're a brotherhood. They got to play for the guy next to them. They knew they could do it. They had confidence. They've been in these situations before. I think being behind at TCU taught them a few things. I guess at TCU, I say, at neutral site versus TCU, whatever you want to say. But I think that they grew up even more. And I think Dwayne Haskins will want to bounce back and have a great first half after, the first half that he had at Happy Valley. So I think all of these things are going to keep Ohio State focused, and I don't think they'll take their eye off the ball and stub their toe against Indiana.
And it's homecoming.
Homecoming, yeah.
So
Sweet.
you never, yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where I agree with you. I think the fact that unlike last year, Ohio State, they have the friendly confines of home, and Urban Meyer even made reference to it today that this team still hasn't scratched the surface of how good they can be. So we might start to see, I would rather Ohio State peak in November,
yes.
but we might start to see some individuals starting to emerge, as you said, maybe Ben Victor some more, Chase Young some more, but some other people getting an opportunity to play in more extended opportunities, and the emergence of players not only for the second half of the season, but also, possibly for the 2019 season and beyond.
Absolutely. I'd actually like to see them start to peak in November and then really peak in January.
Yes.
That's what ideally I would like to see. So, okay, we will be back next week, of course, Chip, to talk about Ohio State versus Indiana. It's homecoming. We all know what homecoming means to Jim Harbaugh. We found that out today. The meaning, what that word means to Jim Harbaugh, it means something. I don't really know what that was, but it means something to him. But homecoming at Ohio State, and we'll be back to talk about that next week. And then, of course, we'll just continue our looks ahead, and we'll talk about any other big items that come out of next week's game again. And I'm looking forward to it because I was kind of a nervous wreck all week, and it's kind of good when you get a game like this afterwards, where you can kind of relax and think they're probably going to take care of business this week. I probably don't have to get so wound up going into this weekend.
Yeah, that makes two of us. That makes two of us. We don't have to be, like I said, there's only so many of those that I can possibly take, and it doesn't help when they're night games either. Like it kind of makes getting, like calming down and going to bed, like a little bit more challenging. So I agree with you. This, I think, will be a little easier on the nerves.
All right, so we'll talk about Indiana next week. We'll also preview the Minnesota game. It'll be the Gophers coming into Columbus, and then, of course, I think probably at Purdue is a game that I'm a little more concerned with, just because it's got the potential for a look ahead, even though Nebraska hasn't been great. Their offense looks like it's starting to come around, and Nebraska would be after that. And then you head into the 3Ms part of the schedule with Michigan State, Maryland, both on the road, and Michigan at home. So the game, of course, concluding the regular season. I can't believe we're 5 weeks into the football season already.
Don't remind me.
But I'm enjoying it. Especially, I'm enjoying it a little more now that we got over that first big hurdle in Penn State. And Ohio State, we didn't talk about that. Ohio State moved up to number 3 in both polls, I believe.
Yes.
All right. I don't really care too much about the polls at this point. All of that will play itself out down the home stretch. If Ohio State takes care of business, they will be in the top 4. That should not even be in question. So, Chip, I think we should tell people where they can find us on social media before we get out of here.
Yeah, I can be found on Twitter at Chip Minnich. My last name is spelled Minnich. And like Michael, I'm a contributor to the Hayes and Cannon section on the ozone.net, as well as for Athlon Sports.
That's right. Theozone.net. There's a hyphen between the and ozone.
Yes.
So make sure you check that out. We are in the Hayes and Cannon section of that. I can be found on Twitter as well as at Mike36Fan. And, of course, you can please subscribe to this here podcast if you haven't subscribed yet. And, Chip, of course, there's a lot of other great shows on the Ozone Radio Network that people can check out.
Yeah, I mean, we've referenced it throughout, this one. We were talking about Across the Field. Certainly don't want to neglect the Sons of Schmidt. I mean, we are just among the many casts of thousands who love, Ohio State football, and try to talk about Ohio State football in one way, shape, or another, throughout the week. So you always have something to listen to.
Right, and there's the Buckeyes Sloopcast as well. So all of those, check out our stuff at theozone.net and Hayes and Cannon. On behalf of Chip Minnich, this is Michael Citro, and we are going to sign off for another week. We're going to go beat Indiana, come back, talk about it next week. Go Bucks!
Go Bucks!